Imagine stepping into a middle school science classroom today. You're probably, expecting to see the latest interactive smartboards. Or maybe, like, digital microscopes?
Oh, or a whole cart full of tablets loaded with virtual simulations. That's everywhere now.
Right, tablets everywhere. But what if the most powerful piece of technology in that room isn't digital at all? What if the ultimate tool for completely rewiring how an adolescent sees the natural world is literally just a blank notebook and a pencil?
It sounds counterintuitive, honestly.
Oh.
Almost too analog for where we are right now in education.
Yeah, totally.
Because we're so conditioned to think that better science just automatically requires, more complex hardware.
More screens, more gadgets.
Exactly. But when you actually look at the cognitive science and the day-to-day practice of real field researchers, a very different picture emerges.
And that is our mission for you today on this deep dive. Whether you're a middle school science educator, a curriculum designer, or just someone fascinated by how the human brain learns, we are jumping into how the simple act of taking a nature journal outdoors acts as a transformative bridge.
It's a huge bridge.
Yeah, and we're exploring this year-long life science program called Bioforge, looking at how it uses field notes to fuse art, literacy, science, and cultural knowledge all together.
Right, because the overarching goal of a program like Bioforge is really about an identity shift.
Okay, unpack that a little. What do you mean by identity shift?
Well, we want to move students away from being passive consumers of textbook facts, right, and turn them into active, rigorous scientific investigators.
Not just reading about science, but doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to do that, you have to put a tool in their hands that forces them to engage with the world directly.
So let's start at the foundation then, because I think in schools we often treat science as this finished, polished file of facts that gets handed down from on high.
Oh, absolutely. The classic textbook glossary.
Right. But real science is incredibly messy. It's standing in the mud, in the rain, frantically writing things down before you forget them. So why do scientists journal in the first place? What's the historical legacy we're tapping into here?
It goes back centuries, actually. There's a really rich tradition. If you look at something called the Grinnell system,
Grinnell.
developed by this zoologist Joseph Grinnell in the early 20th century, he established this really fundamental rule that a physical specimen is scientifically useless without its environmental context.
Huh. So just having the bug isn't enough.
Right. You could bring him this perfectly preserved bird, but if you didn't record exactly where it was, what the weather was like, what specific plant it was sitting on, the data was basically dead.
Context is everything.
It really is. So he created this highly standardized protocol. You had your raw field notebook that you used out on the muddy trail, and then you'd create a polished chronological field journal.
Ah, so a two-step process.
Yeah, with meticulous species accounts, a numbered catalog. It was entirely about capturing the exact relationship between the organism and its habitat.
And you see the stakes of this kind of observation historically, too. The sources bring up Georg Wilhelm Steller during that Kamchatka expedition in 1741.
Oh yeah, Steller's a great example.
Right. His field journals provided the very first European scientific descriptions of Alaska's coastal ecology. And it wasn't like he had a leisurely semester to study it.
Not at all.
He recorded all that data during this brief, incredibly high-stakes, chaotic landing. His notebook was his only camera, essentially.
Right, his only way to prove what he saw.
But taking this out of the 1700s, and bringing it into the modern middle school brain, does the physical act of drawing in a journal actually change a kid's brain hardware?
It absolutely does. And this is where we get into dual coding theory.
Okay, tell me about that.
There's this really fascinating 2018 study by Fernandez, Wames, and Mead. They demonstrated that the physical act of drawing creates incredibly durable, multi-channeled memory traces in the brain.
Multi-channeled, like it hits different areas at once.
Exactly. Think about what happens when you just read a word on a page versus when you physically draw the object it represents.
Okay.
When you draw, you aren't just using your visual system. You're simultaneously activating the semantic, verbal channel, the kinesthetic, physical movement of your hand, and the visual spatial mapping all at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So to use a modern analogy, it's like you're saving the exact same memory file to 3 completely different hard drives in your brain at the exact same time.
That is a perfect way to think about it.
So if one drive fails, you still have the data.
Yes. But beyond just storage, drawing actually alters how we perceive reality in the moment.
Yeah.
Because Our brains are incredibly efficient,
I
right?
don't say lazy.
Well, efficient,
Yeah.
which means they're naturally wired to filter out familiar details just to save processing power.
Oh, right.
If you're walking down the street and you look at a leaf, your brain instantly categorizes it. It goes, yep, that's a leaf. And it completely stops paying attention. It shuts down the observation process.
Yeah. Because if we analyzed every single leaf on a tree, we'd literally never make it down the street.
Exactly. You'd be paralyzed. But drawing forces the brain to analyze spatial boundaries, the intersections of veins, the exact jagged edge of the margin.
It forces you to actually look.
Yes, it overrides that natural filtering mechanism. It forces the student to stop looking at their assumption of a leaf and start looking at the actual physical structure in front of them, which physically builds new neural pathways.
Okay, I love the neuroscience here, but if drawing is so neurologically powerful, we have to address a massive elephant in the room.
Art anxiety.
Yes, the art anxiety. I know full-grown adults, let alone, self-conscious 12-year-olds, who completely freeze up when you hand them a blank piece of paper and say, draw this.
Oh, it's terrifying for a lot of people.
Right. Why is there so much anxiety, and how do we get a middle schooler past it so they can actually learn the science?
It's a crucial point. And it really comes down to cognitive load theory.
Okay, how does that work here?
Imagine your working memory is a small desk. When a student with low drawing confidence looks at a blank page, their desk instantly gets covered in aesthetic worry.
Oh, is this gonna look good?
Exactly. They're stressing about making a pretty picture, worrying about what their friends will think, or feeling like they just aren't talented. All that anxiety takes up the entire desk.
So there's no room left for the science.
None. There is absolutely no working memory left for the deep structural thinking about the biology they're supposed to be studying.
So we have to clear off the desk. We have to take the pressure of being an artist completely out of the equation.
Precisely. And the Bioforge program utilizes a really specific intervention for this, often called draw like a scientist.
Draw like a scientist. Okay.
The explicit goal is empirical documentation, not fine art. And to guide them, educators use this great framework, the ABCDE of scientific drawing.
Let's break that down because I think it's brilliant for any classroom. So A stands for accuracy, meaning you draw only what is actually visible.
Right, no making things up.
Then B is for big. You fill the page, establish explicit scale ratios like 1:1, and use blowout circles to magnify tiny details.
And that B is so important because it immediately stops those tiny, uninformative, nervous little sketches that kids always try to hide in the corner of the page.
Oh, I was definitely that kid.
We all were.
Then C is color and shading. But importantly, this is not for dramatic effect, right?
Right, no dramatic sunsets. It's to represent true conditions, like identifying the exact shade of brown in the soil to determine moisture content, or the specific yellowing of a plant that might indicate a nutrient deficiency.
Got it. D is descriptive, so heavy annotation, labels pointing directly to the sketch. And E is explain and expand, which means generating questions, hypotheses, and notes right there on the page.
Exactly.
Now hold on. I want to challenge the very first letter of that framework for a second.
Okay, bring it on.
If A is accuracy, and we're demanding that students act like, biological photocopiers, aren't we just killing their creativity? We want innovative scientists, not robots. Why explicitly tell them not to use their imagination when drawing a leaf?
It's a very fair concern. I hear that a lot. But we have to distinguish between perceptual drawing and conceptual drawing.
Perceptual versus conceptual.
Okay, when you ask someone to draw from their imagination or memory, they rely on what psychologists call a schema.
A schema.
A generalized, idealized mental symbol. Think about how a kindergartner draws a house. It's always a square, a triangle on top, a door in the middle, and a squiggly chimney.
Oh, yeah. Even if they live in an apartment building, they draw the square and the triangle?
Exactly. That is a schema. And middle school students have a schema for a leaf, too. It's usually a perfect symmetrical green teardrop.
Right.
We have to actively inhibit that mental symbol. Perceptual drawing requires them to observe the highly asymmetrical, bug-eaten, slightly brown, totally imperfect leaf that is actually sitting on their desk.
Oh, I see.
You cannot ask a truly creative scientific question about a phenomenon if you haven't actually observed its reality. Breaking the mental symbol to see the complex reality, that is the actual foundation of scientific creativity.
Wow. That is a massive shift in perspective. You literally have to unlearn the symbol to see the real world.
Exactly.
So once we remove that pressure of making fine art and they're focused on this perceptual drawing, The journal really opens up. It becomes this rigorous space for multidisciplinary literacy. It's not just a sketchbook anymore.
Far from it. A core practice they use here is the words, pictures, numbers framework. Sometimes it's called ABC 123 picture.
How does that work in practice?
You use words for qualitative narrative, numbers to quantify things like population counts or temperature data, and pictures for special relationships. A robust field note inherently has a dual architecture.
Okay, what are the two parts?
First, you have the objective record. This is your metadata. The date, the location, the wind speed, the measurable facts.
And then sitting right next to it is the subjective or reflective record.
Yes.
Which is where the personal reactions go. The analogies, the emotional responses, the confusion. And the sources point out some really engaging literacy exercises they use in the field to build these skills, like collaborative mood stories.
Oh, those are wonderful. Groups of students will sit in the exact same spot in a schoolyard, but each group is assigned a completely different mood, say ominous, joyful, or chaotic.
Okay.
And they have to write a descriptive paragraph of the environment conveying that mood, but without using the actual word.
That's brilliant.
It really teaches them how word choice and descriptive language fundamentally shape our perception of reality.
They also use nature personification, which I love. It's literally having a rock talk where kids write dialogue from the perspective of natural objects.
It gets them thinking about perspective and function.
And they even do morphological analysis in the field. So instead of, memorizing a list of Greek and Latin roots for a Friday quiz.
Which everyone forgets by Monday.
Exactly. They learn roots like organic or transport by physically examining soil decomposition and water movement outside.
And tying all of this together are the core cognitive scaffolding prompts. These were developed by the Beatles Project.
Right, the Beatles prompts. What are those?
3 simple phrases. First, I notice, which grounds this student in objective observation.
Start with what's really there.
Right. Then, I wonder, which acts as the springboard for inquiry and hypothesis generation. And finally, it reminds me of, which forces the brain to search its archives and make analogical connections to prior knowledge.
It makes me think of reading a landscape the way a detective reads a crime scene, or how a literature student reads a dense poem. They aren't just memorizing vocabulary, they are actively translating the physical world into language.
That ties directly into transactional theory and literacy. In this context, the natural world itself is the text.
The world is the text.
Yes. By observing it, verbalizing those observations aloud, and then writing them down, students are engaging in a transaction with their environment. They take a fleeting, chaotic sensory experience and structure it.
Which makes sense.
It's how you move a student toward formal claim evidence reasoning, or CER. They can't make a scientific claim if they haven't first translated the environment into evidence.
Okay, but let's ground this in the reality of the public school system for a minute.
Sure.
Because we have this deeply personal, deeply localized reflection happening in these journals. But how does this actually satisfy formal education standards? Educators listening know they can't just abandon the curriculum to go draw leaves.
Of course not. And the amazing thing here is that this journal practice perfectly operationalizes the rigorous next-generation science standards, the NGSS.
How so?
Well, NGSS relies heavily on science and engineering practices, or SFPs, and cross-cutting concepts, or CCCs. The genius of the Nature Journal is that instead of handing a 7th grader a list of abstract concepts to memorize.
Right. Here are the cross-cutting concepts for the test.
Exactly. Instead of that, the students arrive at them organically. The CCCs just become the rules of the game for organizing their thoughts on the page.
And the Bioforge program structures this so brilliantly. They have a specific protocol for how a student interacts with their journal every single day. Observe, figure it out, Forge.
Yes, that's a rhythm.
They use the field notes right at the beginning of class to immediately engage with whatever story or phenomenon they are investigating that day. And this structure actually evolves across their 6 core units.
The year-long journey is highly intentional. They start with the practice of science, just to build those baseline observation skills we talked about.
Right, getting the desk cleared.
Exactly. Then they move through units covering structure and function, genetics, natural selection, ecosystems, and finally human impact and design solutions. But the journal is the anchor through all of it.
Let's pick one of those units to really illustrate how this works. Say we are in the unit looking at ecosystems or human impact, and we need to teach a massive, abstract, cross-cutting concept, like stability and change.
That's a big one.
Yeah. How does a 12-year-old actually show planetary scale change on a single, mostly blank piece of paper?
They do it through localized, long-term observation.
Mm.
A great example the sources highlight is longitudinal shadow modeling, or using phenology wheels.
Phenology wheels.
Yeah, imagine a student driving a wooden dowel into the dirt in the exact same spot in the schoolyard
Okay.
and measuring the length and angle of its shadow once a month and recording it in their journal.
Oh.
Or they pick one specific tree branch outside the cafeteria and track the development of its buds on a circular chart throughout the entire school year.
Oh, I see. So instead of just watching a quick animation on a smart board about the Earth's tilt,
Which is very abstract.
right, they are actually seeing the shadow stretch out in winter and shrink in spring. Suddenly, this massive concept of seasonal change becomes a highly tangible, localized pattern that they discovered with their own pencil.
Exactly. The abstract concept becomes physically real. And because these patterns are localized, the journal inherently validates the student's unique environment.
It says that the science happening in their own backyard is just as valid as the science in a textbook. Which brings us to a huge component of this curriculum, place-based learning and the Alaska cultural standards. Because Bioforge integrates traditional ecological knowledge alongside modern scientific practices, it profoundly democratizes who gets to see themselves as a scientist.
It really does. A wonderful anchoring phenomenon they use in the curriculum is the Shikanbei stone tidal weir. It's an indigenous engineering structure that is over 11,000 years old.
11,000 years, wow.
Yeah, and they pair that with the Montana Creek fish trap.
And what I found so compelling about how this is taught is that the students use modern scientific tools to evaluate these ancient structures.
Right, side scan the sonar data, autonomous underwater robotics, sea level reconstruction models.
It totally shatters the illusion that science is just, a recent invention that happens in sterile white laboratories. Science is a diverse human endeavor practiced for millennia to survive and thrive.
Absolutely. The sources talk about how the Montana Creek fish trap is essentially a masterclass in biological engineering.
How did it work?
Well, the indigenous designers built a specific interior funnel shape using woven materials. And this funnel was meticulously designed so that juvenile, non-target fish species could easily swim through and escape.
So they weren't just catching everything.
Right. They were capturing only the target adult fish. It was an infrastructure designed to actively preserve the genetic diversity and future population of the ecosystem.
That is incredible foresight. And then Bioforge has students compare that ancient success to the failures of the industrial era, like modern concrete fish ladders built in the 20th century.
Right, and the sources point out that industrial engineers built these concrete ladders with a massive blind spot. They assumed all fish swam with the exact same power as a salmon.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they failed to account for the kinetic energy and turbulence of the water inside those concrete channels. The water velocity was far too high for a species like American shad, so the fish simply couldn't make up the ladder.
So the modern industrial infrastructure failed entirely because it didn't respect local biological diversity.
Exactly. And the ancient indigenous trap succeeded because it was born out of generations of localized observation.
It is the ultimate lesson in why understanding your specific local nature is crucial for survival and engineering. And this place-based approach doesn't only apply to, pristine wilderness either.
Oh, no, not at all.
Studying urban ecology is just as vital. Having students journal about weeds breaking through the concrete in a parking lot or studying the behavior of pigeons at a bus stop, it ensures that all learners, regardless of their zip code, can actively engage in the scientific process.
That is the very core of equity in science education. Authentically engaging students in figuring out their immediate world, wherever that world happens to be.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the end of the school year. We've talked about all these individual entries, the leaf sketches, the shadow measurements, the rock dialogue. What actually happens to this notebook? Because these aren't just worksheets to be graded, handed back, and thrown in the recycling bin.
No, definitely not. The field journal becomes a cumulative portfolio artifact. Remember the Bioforge sequence. Observe, figure it out, forge.
Right.
The forge aspect is heavily tied to engineering and design solutions. And any real engineering cycle relies on understanding that failure is just data.
Failure is just data. I love that.
It's so important. Throughout the year, the journals document the students' metacognition, They're thinking about their own thinking, especially when things go wrong.
And analyzing failure is such a great way to learn. There's a fascinating module mentioned in the sources where they evaluate the Osborne Reef disaster from the
Oh,
1970s.
that's a wild story.
It really is. It was this massive, well-intentioned failure where 2 million loose rubber tires were dumped into the ocean off the coast of Florida to create an artificial reef. But instead, the tires basically became underwater battering rams that completely destroyed the natural coral.
Right. So the students analyze that historical failure of material science in their journals, and then they contrast it with successful modern interventions like biorock mineral accretion.
What's biorock?
It's an intervention where they use safe, low-voltage electrical currents passed through steel frames in the ocean. And it causes limestone to literally grow out of the seawater.
That sounds like sci-fi.
It does. But it creates an environment where corals can rapidly heal and thrive. So the journal tracks their evolving understanding. They go from simple structural observations in September to evaluating complex socio-ecological problem solving in May.
But for this portfolio to truly matter, the physical infrastructure of the journal itself is crucial. The curriculum is very clear about this. The journals must be mostly blank, unlined pages.
Unlined is key.
Yeah, they strongly advise against using pre-printed worksheets because a worksheet actually acts as a cognitive limiter.
It absolutely does. When a student sees a worksheet, the implicit message is there is one correct answer, and your job is to guess what the teacher wants to see in this little box.
Right, a worksheet belongs to the teacher. You fill in the blanks and you give it back.
But a blank field journal, with its unlined pages, belongs entirely to the student. It demands that they decide how to organize the information. They have to decide if a sketch, a graph, or a paragraph is the best way to explain their thinking.
That shift in ownership is deeply transformative.
It really is. By the end of the Bioforge program, the Nature Journal functions as a primary assessment pathway for the educator.
Sure.
But more importantly for the student, it stands as a comprehensive, culturally responsive record of three-dimensional science learning. It's not just a notebook. It is quite literally their personal scientific field guide documenting their entire intellectual journey.
So let's bring all of this together. What we've explored today is how nature journals serve as the ultimate educational bridge. They seamlessly fuse the analytical rigor of the NGSS, the rich context of Alaska cultural standards, and the immense cognitive benefits of multimodal literacy into one profound pedagogical tool.
It connects the hand, the eye, and the mind directly to the environment. It trains students not just to look, but to truly see.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. As you look at these journals full of smudged pencil marks, messy data, and evolving hypotheses, consider this. In 1910, Joseph Crenell's field notes are just the daily records of a guy walking through the California mountains.
Just a guy with a notebook.
Right. But today, scientists use his exact journals as baseline data to prove how climate change has shifted animal populations over the last century.
Wow.
So, what if the messy, imperfect field journal of a 7th grader today, sitting in their schoolyard, tracking the shadow of a dowel or the blooming of a weed, becomes the vital ecological baseline data for a scientist 100 years from now?
That is the true permanence of science.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. To all the educators out there, keep building that curiosity, providing the blank space, and fostering wonder in your classrooms. Until next time, keep observing.